Jason, our guest today, was just telling me about rehab. He's going through some rehab.
So am I.
He broke his leg in like many places, and he's talked about facing his fears. He had to go get on that bike that he was on when he broke his leg. And I just want to appreciate you for facing your fears, because I know I might be the cause of your heart attack.
What's my fear?
Podcasting with me.
Yeah, there you go.
Spending time with me.
Yeah, there you go. Welcome to Making Chips. I'm Jason Zenger. This is going to be a lights out episode, and I've got my co-host here, Nick Gollner. How you doing, Nick?
I'm awesome, man. I'm like I don't smile this big when other people are on. I got my buddy Jason back.
Exactly.
So, sorry, Mike and Matthew and Paul and anybody else. I got Jason back.
Metalworking Nation, I'm sorry that I took several months off, but I am back, and I'm here to cause trouble and to equip and inspire the Metalworking Nation.
I think I need to apologize.
Here we go.
It's really my fault.
You're going to apologize for all the lame content that you produced while I was gone?
And all the stress I put you through trying to be your co-host. I think I caused the whole heart attack in the first place.
No, it's all good. You did. It wasn't your fault. It was not your fault. So, yeah. So it's all good. How you doing, though?
I'm great, man.
Yeah,
it's beautiful weather. We had, I got to tell a quick story, because anyone who's been around the Chicago area knows it's been windy as heck. We're in the middle of a massive expansion. And as I look outside, I see a nice little breeze. I see the weather is beautiful. And it's not what I saw on Monday. Yeah. On Monday, there was a massive gust of wind. And there was a big, collapse of one of the expansions that was under construction. And it was quite the ordeal. Thank God, only a few people had minor injuries from the construction crew who was working on it. And, we're just happy that everybody's okay. We're a little set back now. There's a bunch of twisted metal in a big pile, and we're working through that. But yeah, quite the adventure.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I got some fun facts in a quick story if anybody wants to get an update on me. So
yeah, let's hear it. Yeah.
So as the Metalworking Nation hopefully knows, if you listen to some of the previous episodes, I had the front of my feet amputated because I had necrosis. Go back and listen to the other episodes if you want to kind of know the whole story with that. So anyway, it's time to do a skin graft, which I'm doing on Friday, a couple days from now. So basically they're taking skin from my thighs and they're putting it on the front of my feet. And the most common question that I keep getting asked is, are the front of your feet going to be hairy? Because most guys have hairy legs, you know what I mean, and that's where they're taking the skin from. But
okay, so you're gonna be like a hobbit.
No, rest assured, I ended up asking the surgeon, and he said that the hair follicles and all that kind of stuff is deeper, and what they're taking off as far as the skin goes at the surface level. So my front of my feet
disappointing.
So the front of my feet will not be hairy. I won't need to shave them or anything like that.
You could have been a hobbit for Halloween, and now you got to make new plans.
Exactly. So anyway, you gotta laugh at some of this stuff in order to get yourself through it.
Your attitude through all this is awesome, and we can have fun and. Yeah, just stay positive through all of it. That's encouraging for everybody. So.
Yeah, but I'm having both of them skin grafts, so that's great news, and I'll be on my journey to healing and hopefully walking soon. So
that's cool. Great. Well, speaking of journey, the episode title is a Samurai's Journey to Automation. This is one of our favorite guests that we're about to introduce. He, as I mentioned in the beginning, he just had a massive leg injury, and he's going through some rehab too, so we can probably touch on that. But for those who didn't hear before, our guest today, he began at a prototype shop, really just by chance. His friend helped him get a job. He needed a job. He's like, hey, come work for this machine shop. Didn't even know what CNC was. And, he's the kind of guy who took the scenic route. He graduated high school almost 3 years behind his class. But when he fell in love with the trade, he excelled immediately. He taught himself CAD software at home because that job wasn't doing on-the-job training for CAD. And he just wanted to absorb more and learn more about, making parts, making chips, and how it all works. He ended up moving to Pike and Sierra Space. So taking a leap to some really high tolerance, high risk work where he was doing like, very, very precise components. And then from there, he moved into a machine tool sales and marketing role with Tormach. A lot of us are familiar with Tormach, more of the hobby level machine. And he took a massive leap again, and he's now a service engineer at Kern Precision, which is like some very, very precise machines. So, welcome to the show, Samurai, Steve Courchane.
Hey, how's it going, guys? How you guys been?
Good. Welcome, Steven. It's good to see you.
Yeah, we're good, man.
It's been a while.
I mean, we keep in touch on LinkedIn and stuff, but I just love following your journey. I love your take on things. It's
Absolutely
awesome. Like it's enriches my soul to see these guys that we root for just kicking butt in the industry. So great.
Yeah, definitely like to be able to give back. Kind of feel like that obligation to kind of just give back to the community as somebody that fell into this randomly and absorbed it all, trying to expose it to as many people as possible.
Yeah, so speaking of giving back to the industry, we always do a bit of a segment, before we get into the core topic here. And our segment today is going to be a manufacturing leadership spotlight on a guy who I think, sometimes we help him out here, but I think he throws the best parties in manufacturing. So
he does a good job.
And instead of just calling him out, we're going to call him in to the show. So I'm going to get Chris Lukey on the line here.
What's up, Nick?
Hey, Chris. What's up, man?
Man, I'm just driving to Lagunitas Brewing here in Chicago, Illinois right now, getting ready for an official manufacturing happy hour.
An official happy hour with the guy who I just said throws probably the best parties in manufacturing. I mean, IMTS is maybe a bigger party. They have a few more people than you will, but as far as kind of the grassroots, let's get together, have a beer. There's nobody that tops Chris Lukey. So
I appreciate it. All fair comments, and yes, IMTS is absolutely going to be a huge party this September.
Yeah, that's for sure. So our guest today, like without him even knowing you and I had talked about calling you into the show, he's what'd you say, Steven?
So my wife gave me permission to stay a little bit late today, and since I was doing the recording for this podcast episode, happened to realize that the happy hour happens to be only like a 20-minute drive from where I'm at in Chicago, so I figured I'd shoot over there after this recording.
Yeah, so he's like, hey, I'm going to shoot over there. It's 20 minutes away. I already got a longer leash from the spouse at home. And so he's like, I was going to catch the happy hour. We weren't even talking about it yet. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm going to call in the host of this thing and let him know you're coming. So have a cold one ready for Steven, man.
We will. The more the merrier. We will see you soon, Steven.
Let's talk about, what we talked about yesterday a little bit. We got this little town that actually has more machinists per capita than like any city in the country, or at least it used to. Rockford, Illinois. You called me because you wanted to throw a party there, right?
Absolutely, because this little tour I'm on right now, throwing some happy hours across the Midwest, is just the beginning, because you and I and a whole bunch of other people are going to team up on throwing an even bigger party in Rockford later this summer.
I see Jason smiling right now in the camera. He's like,
I want to be there.
He's like, I want to be there because I don't believe Rockford can throw a better party than Chicago, where he grew up. So we'll have to show him.
You can't throw a bigger party than Nashville. I'll tell you that much.
I look forward to the challenge. I should say it's going to be part of a nice little summer tour that I'll just call the Road to IMTS. We're going to be doing events in Milwaukee and St. Louis as well. So a bunch of the surrounding cities before the big show, the big party, as you called it, gets going in September.
Yeah, and Jason's saying, "Hey, one more stop. Let's do Nashville, where he lives now." But we'll see. We'll see if he can make the circuit. If anyone who's listening wants to join one of these, we're going to be posting on it on our LinkedIn's. You can reach any of us there. We're also, if you're on our newsletters, I'm sure there'll be emails that go out as well. But anything else you want to say before you tap the keg there, Chris?
I just have to say it's always good hearing from the OG podcasters making chips. So always a pleasure collaborating with you, and I look forward to some of that later this summer.
I like, you know what, we gotta play on that. The OG podcasters, and it's got to be like a graphic tee with like an old man with a cane.
I've got a
You guys
necklace
do
with the
great
OG
work
on
over
it.
there. Always a blast hanging out with you.
Or Jason wants to get like a big Flava Flav necklace, like the OG, podcasting. We could do that too. So, hey Chris, I'll let you get riding here, man. But try not to crash in that Chicago traffic and have a blast tonight.
Sounds
See
like
you,
a plan.
Chris.
Catch you later, Nick.
Yep. Bye bye. All right, cool, man. I love that guy. I love what he's doing.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
I was telling him yesterday, Jason. Like, I feel like we do a good job. Like everything he did is on his own. Like this isn't what I'm saying, but we're always good at recognizing like this guy's blowing up, this guy's doing really well.
Yeah,
and Steven's another example of that. It's
absolutely.
Like from when we had Drew on, and look what Drew's doing, look at what Chris is doing, look at what Steven's doing. It's just fun being connected to people.
Absolutely. So, Steven, this has been a while. I think it was like 100 episodes ago, which could have been, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago even.
I think it was right before I was going to Sierra Space, actually. So yeah,
it was, because
we
were talking about
2
that.
years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so how many years ago?
About two and a half
2 years ago.
maybe.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So give us a little just brief overview. This is kind of like when you start watching a show and they're like, okay, in the previous episode. So tell us, who is the CNC Samurai? Where did that come from?
All right, so CNC Samurai, I always grew up like with just a passion for like Japanese culture stuff. I was in karate as a kid. Mm-hmm. I actually like took a trip to Tokyo my first year that I got into manufacturing. I booked that trip before I even took that job. It was just the one thing that I always wanted to do, just always into Japanese culture. As I got into manufacturing, I even had a different tagline that not a lot of people even know. So like, I don't mind mentioning it now. So when people talk about rebranding, I actually used to just have like a name called Ball End Mill. Because when I first got into manufacturing, I was like, oh, a ball end mill does everything. But then I quickly like realized I might pigeonhole myself into that branding. So then I went into thinking of something that's more kind of broad for that. Yeah. And then that's kind of where I got the idea of just like CNC is more than just milling. It's lasers, it's robotics, it's so many different things in manufacturing other than just like a mill. So that, and then where the Samurai comes from is I've always felt like you associate samurais like with the best of their craft. Even samurai swords, you consider them like the peak of manufacturing of like something that can't even be like replicated, kind of like disciplined and honorable. So kind of that idea. And also they can cut through metal. Essentially their swords cut other swords. So kind of being somebody that cuts metal, it with all that kind of just pieced all that together and made it into the CNC Samurai.
So if I remember correctly, the samurais were like the nemesis of the ninjas. Is that correct?
So the samurai were the so ninja was more, the idea was like you were never supposed to see a ninja. So like samurais were the ones that were going to be out on the battlefield. The honorable ones were going to face you face to face. Ninjas were more kind of did the shady stuff that was more espionage. Work. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, like they weren't necessarily an honorable type of person. So even though they did a lot of cool things also, I kind of associate myself more with like the honorable. I want to be able to see somebody face to face and stuff like that.
He's not going to sneak up on you and like cut your throat from behind.
Well, yeah. so really quick, and I have a follow-up question to the whole CNC Samurai thing. But Nick, I know you listen to this podcast once in a while, Cultish, and they did an episode on Cultish of ninjutsu, and it's a weird spiritual cult, actually. It's kind of interesting, you know. So
I could see that.
That's just a side note. That's just
I just got done watching the show Shogun. And like
I heard that's pretty good.
Yeah, like if you ever had like a fall from grace, if you ever did something dishonorable, you would just have to like cut your belly open and die.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like there's tons of that in the show, and I'm like, well, that's intense, you know? Well, how about just saying sorry?
That was actually one of the swords that they kept, like one of the 2 samurai swords that they kept. One of them was specifically like used for that ritual. The shorter one was like for committing act, because that was the idea of like that was actually the worst thing, was having dishonor on your family or whatever.
Yeah. It's something else. I mean, you definitely got a flavor for the culture from watching that show, but you know, I think the stakes are high, right? Like when the stakes are that high, you live with honor.
Yeah.
You know? So we can tie that into manufacturing a little bit. Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, Asia is more of an honor culture in general, and so that's
sure.
where a lot of that comes from. So, why was it important to you to do the branding? I mean, most people don't. I mean, there's a lot of people nowadays that are doing it. I think, in my opinion, there's some branding that falls a little short, especially when it's
Yeah,
like
it's a good question.
of a sexual nature, because you do see some of that in our industry.
Yeah, right.
But like, why was branding yourself important?
Part of that was probably even how I randomly got into manufacturing and like the whole thing with graduating high school late. I never had a good like resume, like your classic paper resume.
Mhm.
I had no way of looking good on that. So
Mm.
I was never even a big social media person in
Hmm.
like ever in life, but realized that social media could be used essentially as a resume for my career. And that was part of like building that, realizing to have a personal brand with it was something that I mean, you could just say reputation. Like you could change those words interchangeably kind of like for that. I was just using that like a brand with a way to keep my reputation in it. And also just, if I'm just like fully honest, I know a lot of people go with their name. Even the company I started at was Dickinson Manufacturing. I didn't like that idea of just like tagging my name as my branding or whatever. Like, it's not that that's wrong, or just like it didn't fit with me, with who I was or anything like that. So I kind of
Okay.
seek that. And then being that I was always a gamer, it was something that I had like a lot of gamer tags. So that idea of like a
Oh, there
branding
you
name,
go. Yeah.
Yeah,
like that,
Yep.
that's like branding everybody does. You have to
yeah.
decide your gamer tag when you play video games.
So I've
Yeah.
That's funny,
always
yeah.
thought fairly deeply about that name, and actually it like had to be 12 letters and it couldn't have numbers. So it's like certain
Mm.
things like that. I actually like had a box that I was always kind of thinking inside of in regards to
Yeah.
that.
It was
Okay.
really hard
Got it.
for us to make sure Jason understood it could not be called the Zanger podcast, but after a while,
Well, that's
actually,
And
why
then
you're
even
Making Chips was
also,
your idea, right?
I was gonna say that's why your tag name is short making chips host, right?
That's right, exactly. It's called Stubby End Mill.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Nice and rigid, right? Yeah. Yeah,
and
shoot.
something like, not to really plug them, but actually like I would say a lot of where that branding came from, who I was listening at the time when I decided to go that route, was Gary Vee. I mean, he's a big famous name or whatever, but I was listening to him at a lot at the time. And
Yeah.
that's also why I separated, like I do have a LLC that I don't do much with. I just established it at the time when I was doing branding, where my LLC is CNC Dojo. That kind of, it's like I have a personal branding and a business branding to keep them
Sure.
separate from each other, but they still are kind of connected, with it being Dojo and Samurai, and kind of keeping that connection between
Okay.
the two.
Yeah,
Got
well,
it.
all right. So Gary Vee's awesome for entrepreneurs and inspiring entrepreneurs, right? He's done that for a lot of people. And in our industry, a lot of people don't think about branding or logos or anything like that until they have a business. Like, I got to call it something. What should we call it? Goldner Manufacturing, something like that, right? So I like that you're thinking that way, but this is lights out at the end of the day. This podcast.
All right,
is
let's
about,
talk automation.
Yeah, it's about automation, and so like when we get into it, you have a really cool path. When we introduced you, your path wasn't always like high end automated machines, and we look at like the current precision products and the solutions that they're offering. And it's a lot more automated than like Tormach, for example. So tell me a little bit about like the machines you're working on now and how you're like maybe how your mindset has changed from where you were at till now.
Yeah, so like one of the major things that's like stand out on the machine, like that's like right in the room here compared to like pretty much all the other machines I've been on, like the maximum tool holders I've ever had on a machine was like 20. And some of them would be like 12 and stuff like that. These ones like start at 100, go up to like 300. You're using like Heimer systems to measure these tools out of the machine. You're able to load them into the carousel while the machine's running. So that idea of like that automation where that machine is essentially having no downtime, you're able to do all the other stuff inside this machine without ever having to essentially turn off the machine or stop the machine to get a lot of those other processes done.
Heimer is a great product for doing automation. We sell a lot of their products too. So
Yep,
I
we
agree
got the
with you.
nice Heimer tool setter system and everything here
Yeah.
for kind of going into that.
It makes sense to me because like when you think, okay, like why would you need 300 tools? And it's because of automation in a lot of cases, right? So if you have, I don't know how many pallets or how many setups are in the Kern cabinet or whatever you guys are using.
Exactly. I don't have the number for that, but they work with like the 3R pallet system. So yeah, that's the idea of like, it's not just you're going to have 300 tools for one job, but if you have 30 jobs and you have 10 different tools per job, that's your 300 tools right there.
Right. And that's one of the limiting factors. Like when we try to sell a pallet delivery system that would attach to, any mill, it's like, I could fill that with a bunch of different work and we can deliver that to the machine, but someone's got to be there to add the tools. And as soon as someone's got to be there, there goes your unattended lights out machining, right? So having that tool capacity is huge.
Some of that, like with tool wear too, like if you get into like harder materials, certain things like that, where you can actually just, have the same tool 5 times in that machine where you're running that tool for a certain amount of hours and then it's just going to go pull that next tool. So there is a redundancy to that, but you're able to store all those extra tools in your machine, like use all the time in the downtime that you have to set up like those 20 tools so that when one breaks, you just run the next one. When one, like where you have that kind of programmed into your automation to just go grab the next one after so many hours of runtime.
Yeah. And that's pretty advanced software stuff that's doing all that, but it's within reach nowadays.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Stephen, obviously you're working at Kern. When you buy a new machine tool and it's a real high-end machine tool, it's going to come with a lot of great automation, but you've also worked at Tormac where, I don't want to say anything bad about them, but they're for a user who maybe isn't going to buy automation with their machine tool because maybe it's a money factor. Maybe they're just getting started. It's a great machine. If my son was like, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to open up a CNC shop, I might consider a Tormac or a Haas or something like that. But how is working for Tormac kind of driven the way that you think about automation now?
So yeah, there's definitely a different level. Like, so even like Tormac machines, a lot of the times, like the customers that I was working with there, they were using that as a way of automating a process that they were doing manually on manual machines before they were looking into a Tormac.
So they were using it as like a secondary process?
Yeah, so that, like, you could still look at those machines as being a form of automating from something below them, but there's always steps up in that process. So now it is like they were maybe automating very small features and very small tasks that they were manually performing before. Now it's the idea of automating your whole shop, essentially creating that environment where you can have, instead of having to hire 20 employees for 20 spindles, having one guy being able to get that one spindle running for, lights out 20 hours and stuff like that. And then, once that machine is dialed in, that same guy with that knowledge that did it with that machine can go do another machine because now that machine is essentially, he got that machine to an automated state. He can then move on to do that with another machine instead of having one person for each machine.
Okay.
Yeah, man. So we're talking about combat, martial arts, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about this UFC fight that happened. It was maybe 2 weeks ago. And this veteran guy was a huge underdog against this young up-and-comer. And, in the pre-fight, they always kind of like talk crap to each other a little bit. Sometimes it's real ugly, and other times it's more like, hey, here's why I'm going to win. And the veteran guy was like, I'm going to show this kid that there's levels to this thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so, like, the veteran guy ends up winning, like, right away. He found a chink in the guy's samurai armor, if you will, and he exploited that, right? And so, like, I think when you're talking about someone who's on a Tormac or a Haas in their garage, and then someone who's got a fully automated shop with tool breakage detection and they're running lights out and everything like that, those guys at maybe a higher end company, they still might have a lot of admiration for that guy who started in his garage, who maybe his form of automation was automating manual machining by just having it be CNC.
Yep.
But there's levels to this game, right? And now you're at kind of one of the highest end companies out there doing some really, really high end stuff. And I think we could think of it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
You're all about gamification, right?
That's exactly. I was going to go there. I'm glad you went there. That's exactly what I think of. Is there's like always leveling up, and again, not to even talk bad on them, but like something that I don't like. Their new machine is out now. Tormac released a new machine. I do feel part of that new machine was them trying to go up another level. But like I'm going back to combat sports. I made the analogy of kind of like boxers once they try to go up a weight class. Once you're punching up a weight class, it's not that not everybody, like, it's not that nobody can do that, but you got to understand that there's challenges once you go up a weight class in the competitor that you're facing there. There's going to, like, so now that if somebody is looking,
game.
Exactly. So if somebody is at that weight class for automation, they have a lot more options that they're looking at now because they're in a different weight class.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to part of your story here where you taught yourself CAD, right? You were working, they had you as an operator. What were you operating when you first started at that prototype machine shop?
Actually, ironically, it was parts for Pike Technologies where I worked later. So Pike Technologies was one of Dickinson's customers where we were doing, it was quantities of under 1,000 essentially. So there was the limit. So even though Dickinson was a prototype shop, they would do mostly prototype parts. They still had certain jobs that would come in, maybe a couple hundred parts quantity wise that were, plus or minus 5, maybe a high tolerance pinhole that you're checking or something like that, but fairly manageable to have like a new guy kind of come in, kind of easy checks where you could even have like fixtures to kind of go checks, kind of stuff like that. But so it was starting on those and then, but also just watching the machine and having like seeing the CAD software, kind of being at the machine, being there, but then seeing the guys at the computer inside the CAD software, I just instantly told myself, I was like, well, that's where I want to be. I want to be in that seat. It's not that, I mean, I love still running the machine, but it was just like, I want to be doing that as well.
Yeah. Do you think that had a lot to do with your level of interest in automation, just the category of automation? Just getting
it was really just
software?
Computer software, and just the idea of like, really, that was the idea of computer software, was automate, like same thing, to automate a lot of functions. Even writing macros, trying to create bots for video games is automating a video game. So like I even like use that mindset a lot when like the kids that play video games nowadays, there's so much automation inside of video games, like where we just say like the levels of automation of like from going from a manual to a CNC. The kids are using that mindset inside of games to essentially try to cheat the game of like, how can I automate this solution so I can walk away from my keyboard and have my character doing all this stuff so I don't even have to be doing it. Like that principle is what automation is in manufacturing, of being able to walk away from your computer and have it still perform the function that you want it to do.
Yeah, I hear that. There's a lot of parts of the game that aren't very fun.
Exactly.
But you need to do them to like get that samurai sword you were talking about or whatever it is. So yeah.
There you go. So before we started recording the podcast, you were telling us about this, kind of model that was, in your head. It's a 3M process. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think the Metalworking Nation will like it.
Yeah, so I was kind of breaking down like the manufacturing industry into like 3 different branches, and I was the way that I was breaking it down was model, make, measure. Yeah, the modeling part would be the engineer, like, even on paper, even just in your head, but that idea of just conceptualizing a design and modeling that out for what you want to have, made. And then the making part, the way that I break it down, is the person kind of operating the machinery that is going to take the raw piece of material into a finished component. And then the measuring is kind of like a wide spectrum of stuff, but it also includes just the metrology of the part, making sure everything is good, but kind of just, I break down measuring into just kind of full analysis of the procedure of just somebody that's paying attention to every level and every variable, measuring everything of what's going on during that process.
For every one of these M's, model, make, and measure, there are ways to automate those processes for certain parts, which is interesting.
Yeah, one of the big ones that I kind of try to push more, that I feel is like the underdog that kind of gets overlooked in automation, is metrology, where there's a lot of metrology equipment now where, like with optical measuring, where you can kind of put a component under it, hit a button, and get a full first article report that you could send to a customer, where the idea of filling out that paperwork and taking all of those like individual measurements independently, that is automation. That's a person that was taking time to do all that stuff. If you can essentially get that automated, that is still a time process, like ROI, that you're saving. It's maybe not loading a part. You're not seeing that same numbers come back in the same way that you are like by loading parts and getting parts, but it's still a time-saving investment for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
and you could even retrieve parts off a machine and put it right into a lot of those
Yep.
measuring tools in order to automate the measuring side of things
And yeah, Kern
from
does
the
a lot of
machine
that,
process
like in process
or
measuring,
in
like
process.
automation.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
that's
that's
what I was
great.
just going to ask about. So we've ran into some challenges trying to sell, we sell these pallet delivery systems from Trinity, and we integrate them with our customers on a lot of times existing machine tools. And sometimes it's like, well, we can't just like bring the pallet into the machine, run the first article, and then run 20 more, because you got to do that check, right? And maybe that check tells you got to do some offsets or something. And so you got to have a closed loop here where you can kind of correct whatever was off on the first one and then run, the 10, 20, 30 or whatever's next through the night unattended and get that lights out dream that we all have, right? So that's pretty cool that Kern's got some of that done in process.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's real cool. So like, I know you're early into it, but do you know how to explain that yet, or?
I'm kind of not at the stage of like even being able to like fully, like, I don't even want to like talk about it yet, because I feel like I would be underselling it for like what it's actually capable of, and don't want to misquote anything on that.
Well,
I'm
yeah,
sure
it's kind
I'll
of
get
an
there
unfair
eventually,
question
but
for you because you started like this week, right?
yeah, and it's and in the position I'm at, I'm not at the where I'm focusing on that part of what I'm doing yet, but I know I'll be getting there for sure.
Well, I hate to break it to you, Stephen, but even if they tell you not to focus on something you're interested in, you're going to do it anyway.
Exactly.
You'll be teaching this class in a year if I know you at all.
And yeah, part of like, I know we were talking about it kind of off the podcast too, but I think all of this kind of connects that idea of where automation is going. It really is bringing back like I was even saying like, there's been the skills gap that everyone talks about. I feel like we kind of created that skills gap by disconnecting the engineer from the person that is operating the equipment. Like when I think of like the 1940s, 1950s, like when I think of like an engineer back then, it was a guy that had his hands on tools and was actually like doing a lot of the work and had like a physical connection to the components that were being made. Where I've been at a lot of like machine shops now where I've worked directly with a lot of engineers that are right out of college that do not have that physical connection to the components. And we've disconnected.
And a lot of them don't want to.
Yeah, he's preaching the manufacturing gospel right now, Jason. I love it.
They just want to sit behind a desk, but I agree. When you take that part from start to finish, I think that's a great skill to have. I mean, if you quote it, you machine it, you help with quality control. I mean, everything. So.
And I don't think you need to be a master at any one of those things, but having a little bit of all of it is, I think, like a key to unlocking that automation solution. It's going to take somebody with that mindset that is able to bring all those pieces together and not have a miscommunication from one person that's good at this one. Like it takes somebody being able to put all those pieces together in their own head to be able to come up with the ideal automation solution.
Yeah, so Jason talked about like within model, make, and measure, there's automation to improve the efficiency within that silo, if you will, right?
Yep.
And then there's also automation that connects these silos into like an actual farm or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you might need specialists in each area, but your organization's going to need somebody who can think holistically about, hey, how do we take make and automate the measure process and then feed it back to the make process so that we're making things that aren't scrap.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to come in after a night full of lights out machining and harvest a bunch of scrap the next day.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love like your kind of framework. I just love the way your mind works. You just think from a cool lens, and I love that model, make, measure idea.
I do say like when people ask like the generic like what's your superpower question, I do say perspective. Like just having very unique of like, I have family in a lot of different highs and lows, like just a lot of different friends in different areas, having that like very rounded perspective. Same with what we were just saying, like the key thing to getting that automation solution solved is being able to bring all that stuff together and piece it all together. So having that perspective come in from all these different areas is like what allows me, I think, to think kind of differently as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like you can talk about what your superpower is as a person without it being, an ego type thing, where you sound cocky or arrogant. It's important to know what you're awesome at. You know what I'm saying? Like Jason, he's awesome at making fun of Nick. And so he just doubles down on that. We built the whole
that's right.
podcast around that.
That's right.
No, I say that too. It's like, I mean, with the whole graduating high school late, I ironically was a kid that was like a failure in this traditional school system, but I've had a school system pay me to go train teachers now at
That's
like
awesome.
a private school. So just like that full circle of like the kid that wasn't good at school is now training teachers on the equipment.
Man. That's what I'm
awesome.
talking about. Because we got to get
awesome.
this, everything you talked about, we got to get that back into the schools.
The school's got to teach the right skills, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Or they're just going to create a bunch of people who are in their little silo. Someone asks them to do something. They're like, that's not my job. That's not my job. What do I do now? So,
And I don't try to say like being from somebody that learned differently than a lot of people. Like I don't try to say they're the right or wrong way of learning, but I do think like something that I see as a problem, like for me, if essentially like I didn't go train myself in the software, and if the software side of things was never like shown to me early in this career and I would just had to run manual machines, I probably would have left the career fully and never looked back and said like, no, this is something that doesn't interest me. So like a lot of all these kids nowadays, they're growing up with software. If you're not showing them the software side and at least getting them engaged with that, like that doesn't mean that that's like they're going to be your lead programmer when they start day one, but you have to at least show them those tools and say like, hey, this is something that you can be doing. This can be where this goes at least. Because if you're not being shown that until years down the road, there's not going to be an interest in it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Steve, those are some good parting words, and we appreciate having you on the show. And it'd be great to have you back in the future too.
And for the audience, we appreciate any rating you give us, as long as it's a good one. Any review you give us, as long as you're talking about how Nick's funnier than Jason. And if you refer this to somebody, like there's a lot of people who need to hear what Steven had to say. So
yeah, there's a share button on your podcast. Just send it right over to somebody else via text.
And if you're like my dad, it's the square with an arrow coming out of it.
Yeah, there you go. Hit the arrow, Dad.
Yeah, come on. How do I share it? I handed her the phone. Hey, so if you're not modeling, making, or measuring, you're not making chips.
And if you're not making chips,
you're not making money.
Bam.